I want to try something right out of the gate today. And I need you to be completely honest with yourself as we do this.
Yeah, and I mean actual unvarnished honesty, not that polished, politically correct version you use in a mid-year performance review.
Exactly. Behind closed doors honesty. I want you to define leadership right now in your head. Or, say it out loud if you're driving or sitting alone in your office.
But here is the absolute boundary. You cannot use a motivational quote you saw floating around on LinkedIn this morning.
Oh man, definitely not. No dictionary definitions either. You have to define what leadership actually means in the exact, messy, highly complicated context of your job as a project manager. Go.
And while you are scrambling to formulate that in your head, let me take a highly educated guess at exactly where your brain instinctively just went.
I bet I know too.
Right. Did you use words like inspiring? Did the word motivating pop up somewhere in there?
Oh, they probably said something vaguely nice about, setting a clear direction or removing roadblocks.
Yeah. Or empowering the team to do their best work. That's a classic one.
Stop right there. If you leaned on any of those words, you need to turn the volume up and listen incredibly closely to what we are about to unpack. Because what you just gave us is not a definition of leadership.
Not even close.
It's a list of comfortable buzzwords associated with the idea of leadership. And there is a profound career-altering difference between understanding the actual mechanics of leadership and just reciting the vocabulary.
We aren't just being pedantic about semantics here either. This isn't some academic exercise. This distinction matters because in roughly 40% of all project management interviews across the industry right now, the hiring manager sitting across the table is going to look you in the eye and ask you a direct leadership question.
Oh, without fail. Tell me about your leadership style.
How do you lead a team? And if you give them that exact answer, the one about inspiring people and setting direction, you are almost certainly going to be quietly eliminated from contention right then and there.
Just like that.
It's not that those words are inherently evil. It's that they are entirely empty. They signal to the person across the table that you are just regurgitating the back cover of an airport business book instead of speaking from the trenches.
Exactly. I mean, put yourself in the hiring manager's shoes for a second. They are sitting there exhausted, trying to fill a role that has been vacant for, 3 months?
Possibly longer.
Yeah, and they've heard that exact same string of polite adjectives 10,000 times from 10,000 other perfectly competent candidates. And you know what their brain does when they hear it?
They completely check out.
They mentally check out. The interview is essentially over, even if they keep smiling and nodding for another 30 minutes. They go to your evaluation sheet and they write 2 words, generic, next.
It is brutal, but it is the unvarnished reality of the hiring landscape we're operating in.
So true.
The hiring manager is actively looking for a reason to filter you out because they have a stack of 50 resumes on their desk, and they only have time to seriously consider 3. The industry has trained you to give these safe, polite answers.
All right, the HR blogs tell you to be collaborative and empowering.
But when you actually sit in the chair and give that safe, generic answer, you are literally handing the hiring manager the scissors to cut you from the shortlist.
So as we get into this deep dive today, going through this massive stack of hiring manager postmortem notes and practitioner research we've compiled, our mission is incredibly specific and urgent. We are going to completely close the massive gap between what project managers think leadership is and what a hiring manager actually desperately needs to hear to give you an offer.
Yes, we are extracting a practical, highly operational definition of leadership today.
And more importantly, we're going to build a 4-part mechanical framework that will take any behavioral interview question thrown at you and turn it into a guaranteed standout answer.
We need to set the tone for this deep dive immediately, though, because the material we are analyzing today has a very raw, intense practitioner energy to it.
Oh, it really does.
It is direct. It is entirely devoid of corporate fluff. We are dealing with maximum insight density here. We are going to challenge some of your core assumptions about your own professional identity today. And frankly, we have to, because the traditional advice is actively failing you.
Yeah, I'll be straight with you. Pausing this deep dive right now or letting your mind wander while we talk is genuinely going to cost you money in your career.
Leaving money on the table.
Exactly. If you are prepping for a steering committee meeting or if you have an interview coming up anywhere in the next 12 months, The mechanics we are unpacking today are the literal difference between landing a top-tier offer with a compensation package that changes your life and getting that polite, automated, "we've decided to move forward with other candidates" rejection email.
2 weeks later.
Right. So stay engaged. Let's get right into the trap of the safe answer.
So the reason most candidates fall back on those safe answers isn't necessarily a lack of intelligence or ability. What's fascinating when you read through these hiring manager notes is that the failure is usually a lack of rigorous contextual thinking.
Makes sense.
Candidates haven't been forced to sit down and define what leadership looks like in the highly specific, highly constrained environment of project management. They think about leadership in general terms, like a military general or a tech CEO.
Right. Without that rigorous context, every candidate's answer naturally converges on the mean.
Exactly.
And like we established, safe is the enemy here. Safe answers basically confirm to the hiring manager that you are a competent mediocrity.
Yep.
You're swimming in a massive pool of other competent mediocrities. You can build a schedule, you can run a status meeting, you can update a Jira board. Great. So can literally everyone else in the waiting room.
All right.
But there's only one open role. You have to be the one person in that pool who sounds completely radically different.
Right.
So let's clear the ground first. Before we can build a new framework, we have to demolish the old one. Let's define exactly what leadership is not.
I always prefer starting via negation. It clears the mental clutter. First, leadership is not a personality trait. Let's dispel that pervasive myth right now. Being naturally charismatic, being highly extroverted, speaking loudly and confidently in meetings, none of that equals leadership.
Or having a commanding physical presence.
Right. If we connect this to the bigger picture of the industry, some of the most phenomenally effective elite project leaders operating today are deeply introverted, soft-spoken, and highly analytical.
Oh, absolutely.
They don't command the room with a booming voice. They command it with undeniable competence. Personality is just the wrapper. It is not the substance of the job.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because the second thing leadership is not is a title. Calling yourself a project leader on your email signature or having it printed on your business card doesn't magically endow you with the ability to move a team. And here is where we hit the absolute brutal reality of being a project manager. Are you ready for this?
Get with it.
You have zero formal authority. None.
It is the defining paradox of the entire profession.
It really is.
Think about it. You are held singularly accountable for the delivery of a massive, complex, multi-million-dollar initiative. Your head is on the chopping block if it fails. But you are not the boss of the people actually doing the work.
No.
You are not their line manager. You cannot promote them. You cannot approve their PTO. You cannot give them a year-end bonus. And crucially, you cannot fire them. You have absolutely zero formal structural authority over the cross-functional team you are supposedly leading.
Zero. And I really want to emphasize this for you listening. This isn't some unfortunate flaw in your specific company's matrix structure that you need to go complain to HR about.
You aren't doing it wrong.
Right. This is the fundamental, inescapable reality of the profession globally. So if we take that massive constraint, this absolute lack of structural authority, we arrive at the real definition of project management leadership. From our sources, here's the exact operational definition. I want you to internalize this, write it down, and burn it into your brain. Leadership is the ability to take people from where they are to somewhere they want to go without having the formal authority to make the move.
See, that definition changes the entire game. Because, let's be honest, any mid-level functional manager with a budget and a direct reporting line can dictate tasks. That isn't leadership.
No, that's just the basic exercise of structural power.
Right. Do this by Friday or I'll write you up. Anyone can do that. Real leadership is what happens when you don't have that power, but you still manage to get a senior data engineer to prioritize your project's database migration over their actual day job that their actual boss is yelling at them about.
Oh, man. That is the holy grail.
It's getting a cynical subject matter expert to work late on a Thursday to finish a deliverable, not because their manager threatened them, but because you somehow influenced them to actually want to do it.
So why does deploying this specific definition make a hiring manager immediately sit up in their chair and lean in?
Because it acknowledges the pain of the job. When you walk into an interview and you admit out loud that getting people to do things without authority is messy, it's highly political, and it's deeply frustratingly human, you instantly gain practitioner credibility.
You sound like someone who's actually done the job.
Exactly. The hiring manager knows this job is a daily grind. They know it requires navigating incredibly complex human egos, hidden agendas, and departmental turf wars.
Yeah.
When a generic candidate glosses over all of that and pretends they just inspire people and everyone magically falls into line singing Kumbaya, the hiring manager immediately knows this candidate is either incredibly naive, deeply inexperienced, or actively lying. Owning the difficulty of the role is the ultimate proof of maturity.
Okay, but wait, I want to push back on this just a little bit, because it sounds good in theory, but in practice, isn't authority exactly what you want as a leader? I mean, think about the reality of the job. It's like trying to steer a massive cargo ship through a storm. But the engine room reports to one captain, the navigators report to a completely different captain in another hemisphere.
And the deckhands belong to a union that doesn't report to anyone at all.
Right. Wouldn't it be infinitely easier and more efficient if you were just the ultimate captain of the whole ship and could just tell everyone what to do?
Well, it would certainly be easier, yes. But that's a different job. That's a CEO or a functional VP. As a project manager, if you sit around at your desk wishing for authority you don't have, complaining that people aren't listening to you because you aren't their boss, you are completely wasting your energy.
That's fair.
The strategic maturity that a hiring manager is looking for comes from recognizing that the lack of authority is actually the crucible that forces you to develop true influence.
How so? Because most people just see it as a handicap, like a massive barrier.
Think about the psychology of compliance versus engagement. If you just order people around using formal authority, you get minimal viable compliance.
To do the bare minimum.
Exactly. They will do exactly what you ask, nothing more. And the second something goes wrong, they will say, hey, I just did what you told me to do. But if you are forced to influence them without authority, you have to build alignment. You get genuine engagement. They own the outcome with you.
Wow, that is a huge shift.
Right. So in an interview, when you say, look, I know I don't have the authority to command these engineers, so here's the exact mechanical process I use to build influence instead, you are speaking the secret language of elite practitioners. You are telling the hiring manager that you don't need them to hold your hand and fight your battles for you.
That is such a powerful shift in perspective. You're moving from a victim of the Matrix organization to an operator within it. But it brings up a really obvious, slightly uncomfortable question.
Let's hear it.
If PMs don't have authority, and they spend all day updating schedules, managing risks, tracking budgets, and begging people for status updates, what exactly are they doing all day? Are they even leaders at all?
Oh, here we go.
This leads us perfectly into our next major concept, where things get a bit controversial. We need to talk about the situational shift, and we need to vehemently, unapologetically defend the manager in project manager.
This is a critical pivot, and it's something almost nobody in the corporate space wants to admit right now. We are currently living in a corporate culture that is utterly toxically obsessed with leadership.
It's practically a cult.
It is a cult. If you look at LinkedIn or read the major business publications, the concept of management has been almost completely demonized. People use the word manager like it's a slur. They say things like, oh, she's just a manager, she's a micromanager, she's administrative, implying that true professional enlightenment is being a visionary leader.
It's absurd. It creates this immense psychological pressure where project managers feel like they have to apologize for doing their actual fundamental jobs. They feel bad asking for a status update because they think a true leader wouldn't need to ask.
Exactly. And I want to defend management passionately right now. Look at the job title. It is project manager, planning the phases, tracking the critical path, reporting to the steering committee, controlling the budget variances, running the governance model, enforcing the change control board. That is pure management. And it is incredibly fundamentally vital.
Without it, you have chaos.
A complex project will spectacularly fail without relentless, disciplined, unapologetic management. You should never, ever apologize for managing the process tightly, because without that rigorous mathematical structure beneath you, your visionary leadership is just a hallucination.
Just a bunch of people feeling really good about themselves while the project burns through cash.
And misses every deadline. Exactly.
I completely agree. But here's where we have to reconcile the two sides. If management is so important, and it's what you do 90% of the day, when do you actually need to be a leader? If management is sufficient, why are we talking about leadership at all? The source notes provide this brilliant framing that completely unlocked this for me. Leadership is not a permanent 247 state of being. You don't walk into the office at 8 a.m. and turn on your leadership aura.
No, you'd burn out in a week.
Leadership is a situational response.
And that raises the most important question for any practitioner. What triggers that response? When do you drop the management tool and pick up the leadership tool?
Right.
The answer is, it is triggered when the meticulously planned schedule violently clashes with human reality.
Yes. The Gantt chart says the testing phase takes 2 weeks. That's the management math. But human reality says the lead tester's dog just died. The secondary vendor is actively lying about their progress to cover up a mistake, and the project sponsor is threatening to pull the funding because of a sudden market shift.
And the spreadsheet cannot solve that.
The spreadsheet is useless there.
That is the trigger. Management is the process. Leadership is the behavioral intervention. When you are sitting in an interview and the hiring manager asks about your leadership style, they are not asking if you walk around being a charismatic leader every second of the day. They are probing for your situational awareness.
Right.
They are silently asking themselves, does this candidate know when to stop managing the spreadsheet and start leading the people? And do they actually have the psychological tools to execute in that specific moment of crisis? Or are they just going to keep pointing at the red status indicator on the dashboard and panicking?
I love visualizing it this way. Here's where it gets really interesting. Think of it like a massive locomotive. Management is laying down the train tracks. It's the civil engineering. It's making sure the rails are parallel, the switches work, the signals are timed correctly, and the schedule is posted at the station. That takes incredible discipline. But leadership is what happens when the engine stalls out on a steep hill in the freezing rain. The tracks are perfect, but the train isn't moving. Leadership is when you have to get out of the warm conductor's car, rally the cold, tired passengers, and physically push that train over the crest of the hill. You don't push the train all day long. That would be exhausting and stupid. You only do it when the tracks aren't enough to get you there.
That is a phenomenal analogy. And imagine sitting in an interview and deploying that exact concept.
It changes the whole dynamic.
The candidate who can articulate that distinction, who can look the hiring manager in the eye and say, I manage the process relentlessly and without apology, but I lead the people situationally when the process inevitably breaks down. That candidate sounds like a seasoned, battle-tested veteran. Regardless of their actual age or years of experience on their resume, they immediately signal a level of maturity that most people never reach.
So, knowing when to lead is half the battle. You wait for the breakdown. But knowing how to actually execute that leadership, and more importantly, knowing how to articulate that capability when you're sweating in an interview chair under bright lights, requires a rock-solid structure. You cannot just wing this.
No, if you try to improvise your answer, you will naturally fall back into the buzzword trap.
Every time. Which brings us to the core engine of today's deep dive, the 4-part framework. This is the mechanical structure from our source material that guarantees a standout behavioral interview answer. The 4 parts are vision, communication, followers, and character. Let's tear into the first 2.
Let's start with vision. Now, typically when we hear the word vision in a corporate context, we think of Steve Jobs unveiling the iPhone or Elon Musk talking about Mars.
Grand philosophical, world-changing dreams.
Right. In the context of project management, you have to completely strip all of that romance away. It is dangerous. In a PM context, vision is simply one thing: scope.
Scope. Sounds so boring. It sounds administrative.
I know, but it is the absolute bedrock of success. It is the lifeblood of the project. Vision means you have a violently precise, fiercely protected picture of the deliverables, the timelines, the budget constraints, and the quality metrics. A definition of scope so clear that an external auditor could walk in off the street, read it, and know exactly what is being built.
Wow.
Your primary job as a leader is to hold that picture in your head with absolute clarity and then ensure every single person on the team, from the sponsor to the junior developer, sees that exact same picture.
And here's the reality. Most PMs fail at this.
Yeah.
They let scope creep happen. Why? Not because they're bad people and not because the stakeholders are evil. They fail because their vision, their internal documented picture of the scope wasn't clear enough or legally tight enough to defend when a powerful VP stakeholder walked up and asked for just one tiny little extra feature. It should only take a day.
Exactly. When the vision is blurry, the boundaries collapse. So in an interview, when asked a leadership question, you don't talk about inspiring people with a grand mission. You immediately anchor your answer with vision as scope. You tell the hiring manager, my leadership begins with absolute clarity on scope. I define the destination so precisely that the engineering team never has to guess what success looks like, and I vigorously protect that definition against the constant, inevitable political pressure to expand it.
That explicitly tells the hiring manager you are a strategic defender of the project's boundaries, a protector of the company's capital, not just a passive order taker who says yes to every executive whim.
Exactly. It shows teeth.
Okay, that brings us to the second part of the framework, communication. And I'll be honest, when I first read the notes on this, I thought, great, more advice about active listening and sending clear emails.
Oh, it's so much deeper than that.
It is. The sources have a really unique, aggressive, highly mechanical take on this. Communication is not about talking more. It's not about sending longer, more detailed emails or holding more daily stand-up meetings. It is strictly defined as the act of closing the gap.
What's fascinating here is the mechanics of that gap. Communication is the process of taking the precise vision, the scope in your head, and ensuring it lands perfectly intact in someone else's head. That distance between your brain and their brain is the most dangerous territory in all of project management.
So where all the monsters live.
It is where assumptions hide, where misinterpretations fester, and where millions of dollars are wasted.
Right, but I have to push back a little. Isn't that just a fancy way of saying active listening? You tell them something and you ask them to repeat it back to you. It feels a bit basic.
It sounds basic until you look at why projects actually fail. It's not just active listening, it's structural alignment. Let's say you tell a vendor, we need the data migration completed by Q3. In your head, Q3 means July 1st because that's when the testing window opens. In their head, Q3 means September 30th because that's the end of the quarter.
Oh man, I've seen that exact scenario happen.
If you don't close that gap, if you just assume your definitions match, you are going to have a catastrophic failure in August. Communication as a PM is the relentless, almost paranoid pursuit of verifying that the picture in their head identically matches the picture in yours.
Okay, that makes sense. It's not about the volume of words. It's about the precision of the shared reality. Which makes me want to ask you a question. I want the listener to really think about this too. If communication is arguably 90% of a project manager's job, why is it the least taught, least tested skill in all the major PM certifications? You can get a globally recognized certification by memorizing earned value formulas and critical path node diagrams, but they never put you in a room and test if you can actually de-escalate a screaming stakeholder or extract a true status update from an introverted engineer.
It is a massive systemic failure in how the profession trains its practitioners. We test the math, but we completely ignore the human mechanics. Because if you do a forensic root cause analysis on almost any spectacularly failed project in corporate history, at the very bottom, beneath the budget overruns and the technical glitches, you will almost never find a math error. You will find a communication failure.
Every single time.
A requirement that the business client thought meant one thing, but the outsourced developers interpreted as another. A critical architectural risk that a junior engineer noticed and whispered about in a Slack channel, but the PM didn't broadcast loudly enough to the steering committee. A strategic pivot made in a closed-door executive meeting that was never cascaded down to the people actually writing the GED. Miscommunication is the silent, lethal killer of projects.
And here's the scariest, most critical insight about communication, specifically in the context of you trying to get a job. The interview itself is not a conversation. It is a live, real-time, high-stakes communication test.
Yes. This is a massive blind spot for so many candidates. The hiring manager is not just passively listening to the content of your answers. They are actively evaluating the architecture of your answers. Are you precise? Do you ramble for 5 minutes when asked a simple yes or no question?
Do you use a million filler words when you get slightly nervous?
Right. Do you speak with conviction? Or do you hedge and use weak language like I think, I feel, or we tried to? If you cannot communicate your own career history clearly and concisely in a relatively low-stakes 50-minute interview, why would that hiring manager ever trust you to communicate a multi-million-dollar project status to a hostile, impatient executive board?
That is chilling, but it's 100% true. You are demonstrating your communication skills every single time you open your mouth. Your medium is your message.
Exactly.
So vision and communication are your internal tools. They are how you see the project and how you transmit that sight. But a project doesn't happen in a vacuum. You need people to build the thing. Which leads us to the second half of the framework, followers and character. This is how your internal tools interact with the messy external world. Let's start with followers.
This is the component that makes highly technical, process-oriented people deeply uncomfortable because it forces a brutal reality check. There is a blunt, uncompromising quote from the practitioner notes that sums this up perfectly. Leadership without followers is just a person walking alone and calling it a parade.
Ouch. That stings.
It's meant to. You can have the most perfectly defined vision. You can communicate it with flawless clarity. You can have the most beautifully color-coded Jira board in the company's history. But if nobody is actually moving in the direction you're pointing, you are not leading. You're just making noise in a silo. You are an administrator of a dying initiative.
So we arrive at the million-dollar question. How do you actually get followers when, as we've already firmly established, you have absolutely zero formal authority to force them to follow you? You can't threaten their jobs, so what is the mechanic?
The mechanic is creating win-wins. You have to master the psychology of influence without authority. And to do that, you have to understand what I call the transaction of influence. It starts with a heavy, strategic dose of professional empathy. You have to step outside your own project bubble and recognize that every single person on your cross-functional project team has their own personal agenda.
Everyone has an agenda.
Exactly. They have their own deep-seated fears, their own career ambitions, and their own line manager breathing down their neck about their day job metrics. Your critical top priority project is probably just one of a dozen annoying things on their overflowing plate.
So you have to connect the dots for them. You have to actively align the project's needs with their personal selfish agenda. But how do you actually do that without sounding like you're manipulating them or playing armchair therapist? You just invite them to coffee and ask, what are your hopes and dreams? That feels weird.
No, you definitely don't ask about their hopes and dreams. You keep it highly professional, but probing. You use the career trajectory pivot. Let's walk through a scenario. Let's say you have a highly skilled, incredibly cynical subject matter expert. Let's call him the cynic. He's been at the company for 10 years. He knows where all the bodies are buried, and he is completely disengaged from your project. He ignores your emails. Most PMs would complain to his boss that he isn't being a team player, which immediately creates an enemy.
Right. Escalating to management is the nuclear option. It burns the bridge forever.
Exactly. Instead, you sit down with the cynic not to talk about your project status, but to talk about his reality. You ask questions like, what kind of work did you do on your last major initiative that you absolutely hated and want to avoid here? And what is the specific type of high visibility work you need to do this year to justify your next promotion to principal engineer? You discover that he is profoundly bored out of his mind in his day job, maintaining legacy systems.
Okay, you found the motivation. Now what's the transaction?
You align it. You go to him and say, look, this new project involves a level of technical architectural complexity that nobody else in the entire department has the chops to handle. If we mess this up, the system crashes. I need you to own this specific, highly complex piece, and I will shield you from all the administrative status meetings so you can just build. You just aligned your project's need for elite expertise with his deep human need for intellectual stimulation and respect.
Or take the opposite end of the spectrum. You have a junior business analyst who is ambitious, hungry, and desperate to climb the corporate ladder, but she's stuck doing grunt work. You sit down with her and say, if you nail these requirements documents and ensure they're flawless, I'm not going to present them. I'm going to put you on the agenda to present them directly to the VP steering committee next month.
Boom.
You just aligned your desperate need for high-quality, meticulous requirements with her desperate need for executive visibility.
Exactly. And I want to address your earlier point about manipulation because it's a common fear. Let's be very clear. This isn't manipulation. Manipulation is tricking someone into doing something that harms them for your benefit. This is deep, strategic, professional empathy. It is the exact opposite of manipulation. You are doing the hard, proactive work of understanding what your team members actually care about and making the success of your project the exact vehicle for them to get it.
And when you can explain that in an interview.
Oh, when you explain that specific methodology, the process of diagnosing motivations and engineering win-wins, the hiring manager will practically throw the offer letter at you. Because it proves you don't just expect people to follow you, you actively engineer the psychological conditions for them to want to.
Okay, that is incredibly actionable. Let's move to the final and perhaps most difficult part of the framework: character.
Character is the bedrock. Everything else we discussed rests on it. Vision can be taught in a seminar. Communication can be practiced with a coach. Followership can be engineered using the tactics we just discussed. But character cannot be faked, at least not for long, and it only truly reveals itself when everything goes completely disastrously wrong.
And let's be real about the industry. In project management, things are going to go wrong. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. Vendors will lie, code will break in production, budgets will be slashed halfway through.
Which is exactly why elite hiring managers probe for character relentlessly. They don't care how you act when the project is green and under budget. They will intentionally ask you about a time you failed. They will ask about intense interpersonal conflicts or a time you had to walk into a room and deliver terrible, career-limiting news to a hostile sponsor. When adversity hits, a project manager has exactly two options and only two feelings. You can own the outcome, or you can explain it away.
Wait, I really want to pause and emphasize this because this is a trap so many candidates fall into without even realizing it. Are you saying that when a candidate is asked about a delay and they say something completely factual like, well, the project was delayed because the software vendor missed their delivery date by 3 weeks, they think they're just accurately explaining the timeline of the problem? But what the hiring manager actually hears is, I don't own my outcomes. I am a victim of circumstance.
That is precisely what the hiring manager hears. It is the kiss of death in an interview. When you blame the vendor, the bad weather, the indecisive client, or the incompetent developers, you are actively communicating that you view yourself as a passenger on the project, not the driver.
Wow.
You are explaining away your ultimate responsibility. A candidate with true character, the candidate who gets the job, says, the vendor missed the deadline. Ultimately, as the project manager, I am singularly accountable for the final delivery, which means my vendor management protocols, my early warning risk monitoring, and my escalation triggers simply weren't tight enough. That level of extreme, unflinching ownership is incredibly rare, and it is highly, highly prized.
It's like you're looking the hiring manager in the eye and saying, I am the shield. Everything stops with me. I don't pass the buck.
Yeah.
But let me challenge you on this. You said character can't be faked. I have to disagree. People fake character in 50-minute interviews all the time. Sociopaths are notoriously great interviewers because they know exactly what to say to sound accountable. How does a hiring manager actually detect real hard-earned character versus rehearsed fake vulnerability?
That is a phenomenal question. And you're right, the initial statement of ownership can be faked. I take full responsibility. Anyone can memorize that line. But the hiring manager detects the fake in the follow-up. A faker takes responsibility but then stops talking or pivots quickly to a completely unrelated success story. True character is revealed by what the candidate did after the failure. And that concept of proving ownership cues us up perfectly for what is universally considered the most terrifying part of any interview, the failure question. This is where you expose the fakers.
Ah, yes. Tell me about a time you failed. It is the ultimate pressure test. It evaluates your character, your self-awareness, and your communication skills all at once. And there are two massive, gaping traps candidates fall into here.
Let's break them down so our listeners never fall into them again. The first trap is denying the failure entirely. They say something absurd and rehearsed, like, I've never really had a project truly fail. I always find a way to pivot and succeed. Or even worse, they use the dreaded humble brag. My biggest failure is honestly that I just care too much, I work too hard, and I have trouble unplugging on the weekends.
If I'm a hiring manager and I hear that, my eyes roll so far back into my head I can see my own brain.
If you say that, you are immediately disqualified. It signals one of two things to the hiring manager. Either you are incredibly inexperienced and have never actually managed anything of true consequence or complexity, or you are fundamentally dishonest and lack the self-awareness to admit your flaws. Both are fatal to your candidacy.
The second trap is the complete opposite. It's the overconfession, the trauma dump. This is when the candidate sits back, takes a deep breath, and describes an absolute apocalyptic catastrophe. They describe a project where the budget was on fire, the client sued the company, the team quit, and the servers melted. And then the story just ends.
Yeah.
There's no resolution, no learning, no recovery. Just a vivid, detailed description of their own massive incompetence and a lingering, awkward silence in the room.
It's excruciating. You have to find the middle path between denial and trauma dumping, and that path requires a complete cognitive reframe of what the word failure actually means in this specific professional context. In project management, unless a project legally bankrupts the company or causes physical harm, the only permanent failure is failing to learn from the event. Everything else is just a temporary setback. A budget overrun is a setback. A missed milestone is a setback. A hostile stakeholder is a setback.
So you completely reframe the failure question in your mind into a setback and recovery story. And our practitioner sources give us a brilliant, specific, mechanical three-part structure for answering this question flawlessly every single time. I want you listening to write this formula down. What happened, what I did, what I changed. Let's walk through the devastatingly effective example provided in the source material to see how this works in real life.
Let's break it down piece by piece. Part 1. What happened? Keep it brief and factual. You say, a critical infrastructure project I was leading slipped by 6 weeks because a key hardware vendor missed a non-negotiable delivery milestone. I had categorized this vendor dependency as a medium probability risk on my register, but the impact materialized fully and the timeline was compromised.
Notice what isn't there. There is no whining. There is no emotional language. There is no throwing the vendor under the bus. It's just a cold, clinical statement of facts and an upfront admission of a miscalculated risk on your part. Okay, moving to part 2, what I did. This is the recovery phase.
I escalated the issue immediately to the steering committee with a proposed mitigation plan. I sourced a secondary local vendor within 4 days to run parallel work streams. Through aggressive fast tracking of the testing phases, we recovered 3 of the 6 weeks. I then sat down with the client, presented the revised timeline transparently, and negotiated the remaining 3-week delay as a formal timeline amendment with 0 financial penalty to our company.
Look at the sheer density of skills demonstrated there. In 4 sentences, you just proved you can handle executive risk escalation, emergency procurement, schedule compression techniques, and high-stakes client negotiation, all while keeping a cool head. You didn't just survive the failure, you managed the hell out of it. And finally, part 3, the most important part, what I changed. This is how you prove your character isn't fake.
The structural lesson. You finish by saying, the lasting lesson I took from that setback is that any single-source vendor dependency on the critical path is now automatically treated as a high-probability risk on my RAID log, regardless of that vendor's stellar historical track record. I completely changed my risk assessment logic and my early warning trigger system.
That answer is an absolute machine. It is bulletproof.
Why does it work so flawlessly? Because it demonstrates ultimate resilience. It shows the hiring manager that you don't panic or freeze when things go wrong, you execute a clinical recovery protocol. And most importantly, by explaining precisely what you changed about your methodology, you implicitly guarantee the hiring manager that if they hire you, you will never, ever make that specific mistake on their dime. You have already paid the painful tuition for that lesson somewhere else. They get the upgraded version of you.
So what does this all mean when we put the pieces together? Now that you have the true definition of leadership, the situational awareness of when to manage versus lead, the 4-part mechanical framework, and the failure reframe, it is time to translate all this theory into hard practice. We are going into the wild. We are going to do a rapid-fire breakdown of 3 classic guaranteed interview case studies. We will look at the weak, generic answer that 90% of candidates give, and then we'll contrast it with a strong, highly engineered answer using our new tools, and we'll dissect exactly why the strong answer wins psychologically.
Let's do it. Case study number 1. The prompt is the absolute classic, what is your leadership style?
I'll play the generic candidate. Here is the weak answer. I'd say my leadership style is very collaborative and empowering. I really like to lead by example, and I make sure I'm always available to support my team. I have an open door policy. I think it's important to trust people to do their jobs without micromanaging them.
If we evaluate that answer objectively, it is entirely meaningless. It is a collection of HR buzzwords taped together. Collaborative, empowering, lead by example, open door policy. If I'm the hiring manager, I cannot visualize what you actually do on a random Tuesday morning based on that answer. It describes vague, nice intentions, but it provides 0 operational realities.
Okay, let me try again. So I'll use the framework. Here's the strong answer. I would define my style as structured pragmatism. When it comes to the process, the definition of scope, the budget variances, the change control board, I manage that incredibly tightly. That rigor is not negotiable. But my approach to the people is highly situational. If I have a junior team member who is new to the methodology, I am highly directive. I give them clear boundaries, daily checklists, and frequent check-ins. But if I'm working with a senior enterprise architect, I am completely hands-off. I protect their time from corporate bureaucracy, I ask them what resources they need, and I get out of their way. For example, on my last project, a senior developer was bogged down in daily 15-minute stand-up meetings that were ruining his coding flow state. I canceled his attendance, took over his reporting by pulling data directly from his commits, and his productivity doubled.
Look at the beautiful architecture of that strong answer. It opens with a memorable, slightly provocative philosophical hook-structured pragmatism. It immediately uses the framework we discussed, managing the process tightly, which demonstrates vision and scope protection and leading the people situationally. It proves the candidate understands that leadership isn't one size fits all, it requires diagnostic skills. And it ends with a concrete, highly specific example of creating a win-win for a follower. It hits every single psychological note the hiring manager is listening for.
Let's move to case study number 2, the prompt. How do you influence people who do not report to you? This tests the zero authority reality.
The weak answer goes something like this. Well, I just try to be really approachable and friendly. I focus on clear communication. I take the time to build strong personal relationships with my team so they respect me. And then I just make sure they understand why the project is super important to the overall company goals.
Again, approachable, clear communication, strong relationships. It's pure fluff. It assumes that if people just like you, they will happily work 60-hour weeks for you. That is fundamentally not how the corporate world functions. People do things for their own reasons, not for the company's grand goals.
Now listen to the strong answer. I always start by explicitly acknowledging to the team that I have zero formal authority over them, because pretending otherwise creates instant resentment. My entire methodology for influence is based on aligning interests. Before a project kicks off, I have one-on-one meetings with key cross-functional team members, and I specifically don't talk about the project tasks. I ask them about their career trajectory and their current departmental frustrations. Then, I use that intelligence. If a developer wants to learn a new machine learning coding language, I try to assign them the specific module that uses it. If a BA wants a promotion next cycle, I make sure their name is front and center on the deliverables presented to the VP. I don't demand they prioritize my project out of the goodness of their hearts. I engineer the project so that prioritizing my work actively serves their own personal goals.
That is lifeful in the best way possible.
Yeah.
You just told the hiring manager you are an absolute master of corporate psychology. You aren't crossing your fingers and hoping for influence. You have a systematic, repeatable methodology for manufacturing it.
And notice the stark contrast in the fundamental types of answers. The weak answers constantly describe good intentions. I try to be clear. I want to be empowering. The strong answers describe repeatable methodologies. I have one-on-ones to extract career goals, and I assign tasks based on that data. Hiring managers don't hire intentions. They hire methodologies that can scale.
Case study number 3. This one is notoriously tricky. Tell me about a time you had to manage a difficult stakeholder.
The weak answer, I had a stakeholder who was really demanding and constantly changing their mind about what they wanted. It was really frustrating for the team, but I just kept communicating with them. I set up more frequent touchpoint meetings to ensure we were on the same page. And eventually we got to a place where they were happy with the final product.
Kept communicating. What does it even mean operationally? Did you email them more frequently? Did you yell at them in a hallway? Did you bake them a cake? There are absolutely no mechanics there. It just says we talked until it was fine.
Exactly. Now, the strong answer. I had a senior operations director who was actively hostile to the project. He was rejecting deliverables and escalating complaints to the sponsor weekly. I realized his behavior was a symptom, not the root cause. I set up a one-on-one meeting and spent 90% of the time just listening. I discovered that during the initial requirements phase, which happened before I joined the project, his department's core operational needs were completely ignored to save budget. His hostility was just a rational reaction to feeling unheard and threatened. So I didn't argue with him. I documented his missing requirements, priced out the exact schedule and budget impact of adding them, and co-authored a formal change request with him. We went to the sponsor together. The sponsor approved the budget, the director got his critical features, and he instantly transformed from our biggest roadblock into our biggest executive advocate. My takeaway is that a difficult stakeholder is usually just a symptom of a process failure upstream. My job is to diagnose the failure, not just manage their mood.
Wow. Let me pause and play the skeptic for a second, because a listener might be thinking, wait, you documented his missing requirements and went to the sponsor with a change request. If I bypass my difficult stakeholder and expose the missing requirements to the sponsor, the stakeholder is going to view that as an act of war. I just made him look bad.
But listen closely to the specific mechanic in the answer. You don't do it to him, you do it with him. You co-author the change request. You say, you're right, the previous PM missed this. This is critical for your department. Let's go to the sponsor together and get you the budget you need. You validate him, and you make him the hero of his own department. You use the formal change management process to solve a human political problem. That is next-level leadership.
It is a bulletproof answer. You prove you can de-escalate executive conflict, you prove you understand root cause analysis, and you prove you know how to use formal PM governance to manage human emotions. These case studies prove that the material you are bringing to the interview isn't just a recitation of your resume bullet points. It is your ability to frame your past experience through a lens of extreme strategic maturity.
Which brings us to the final stretch. To make absolutely sure you don't accidentally slip back into those terrible generic habits we just spent the last hour breaking down, we are going to set some hard, non-negotiable boundary rules. These are the rapid-fire rules of PM leadership answers. There are 5 absolute nevers. Let's hit them and debate them quickly.
Rule 1. Never deny that leadership is difficult. If you walk in and try to play it cool, acting like managing people without authority comes naturally and easily to you and you never break a sweat, you signal that you haven't actually been in the trenches of a truly complex project. Embrace the difficulty.
Exactly. Rule 2, never use formal authority as your primary influence. Even if you temporarily happen to have it, maybe you are a hybrid PM and line manager saying, I told them to do it because I'm the boss, is a massive red flag in an interview. It shows a complete lack of sophisticated influence skills.
But wait, let me challenge Rule 2. What if there is a literal, blatant safety violation on a construction site? Or a massive legal compliance issue in a software release? Surely you pull rank and use authority then, right?
Yes, of course, you stop the work. But recognize the difference. Stopping work for a safety violation is compliance. It is not leadership. Leadership is what you do the next day to fix the toxic team culture that caused the engineer to think skipping a safety protocol was acceptable in the first place. You can't command a culture change.
That's a great distinction. Okay, Rule 3. Never talk negatively about former team members. If you sit there and say, well, the project failed because my lead developer was lazy and the QA team was incompetent, the hiring manager immediately experiences the drama triangle. They assume that in 6 months, you will be sitting in someone else's office calling their team lazy and incompetent. If your team failed, it happened on your watch. Own it.
Rule 4, never deny failure. We covered this extensively. Denial is either blatant lying or a sign of profound inexperience. Embrace the setback and relentlessly focus on explaining the recovery and the structural change.
And finally, Rule 5, never confuse activity with leadership. Running a bloated 2-hour status meeting where everyone reads off a slide is not leadership. Filling out a RAID log and changing the colors from green to yellow is not leadership. Those are necessary administrative activities. Leadership is the specific behavioral intervention required when those documents fail to capture the human reality on the ground.
And that brings us to the brutal reality check of this entire deep dive. This is the ultimate uncomfortable truth bomb from our practitioner notes, and it is something that should fundamentally change how you view your entire career trajectory from this moment forward.
Let's hear it.
The reality is this. The difference between getting the job offer that changes your life and getting the generic rejection email is very, very rarely about who actually has the most experience. It is rarely about who has the most alphabet soup certifications after their name, and it is almost never about who is technically the best project manager in the field. The hiring decision is almost entirely based on one singular, isolated variable, the candidate's ability to communicate value, structure their thoughts, and demonstrate maturity under extreme pressure in a 50-minute window.
That is a tough, bitter pill to swallow. You could have 10 years of absolutely flawless project delivery. You could have generated millions of dollars of value for your previous company, and you will routinely lose the job to a candidate with only 3 years of experience simply because that junior candidate structured their thoughts better and used the frameworks we discussed today during that specific 50-minute window.
It is a tragedy. I have seen highly competent, brilliant project managers stall out in their careers, getting passed over for promotion after promotion because they stubbornly believed that their resume and their hard work would speak for itself. Let me tell you right now, your experience does not speak for itself. It is inanimate data on a piece of paper. It is dead. You have to breathe life into it. You have to speak for it. You have to contextualize it, structure it, and deliver it with undeniable impact.
I want to speak directly to the anxiety you might be feeling right now as a listener. If you are sitting there thinking, I hate interviewing, I'm an introvert, I'm not a smooth talker, I feel like I'm terrible at this, that is perfectly okay. Interviewing is a completely separate skill from project management. You don't manage projects in 50-minute verbal sprints. But here is the incredible good news. Because interviewing is a separate, discrete skill. It can be engineered. It can be hacked. You do not have to be naturally charismatic or extroverted to crush an interview. You just have to rigorously apply the mechanical frameworks we discussed today.
You are building a mental architecture. When you walk into that interview room, you aren't sweating, crossing your fingers, and hoping the right words magically come to you. You are executing a predefined, highly engineered communication strategy.
So let's recap the journey we just took. We started by ruthlessly stripping away the empty, meaningless buzzwords like inspiring and empowering. We embraced the uncomfortable reality that PMs have zero formal authority, and we redefined leadership as moving people without that structural power. We vigorously defended the critical importance of management, recognizing that leadership is a situational response triggered when the tracks run out. We built the four-part framework vision as protecting scope, communication as relentlessly closing the gap, followers as engineering win-wins, and character as demonstrating extreme ownership of outcomes. We reframed the terrifying failure question into a setback and recovery story. And finally, we accepted the harsh reality of the 50-minute communication window.
Remember, knowledge without application is just intellectual entertainment. This framework requires active, deliberate practice. I strongly encourage you, do not wait until you have an interview scheduled on your calendar. Sit down tonight. Not tomorrow morning, not this weekend when you have more time. Tonight. Take your 3 core project stories and rewrite them using this exact framework. Audit your past answers. Are you explaining away outcomes? Are you relying on HR buzzwords? Fix them now in the quiet of your own home before you are under the hot lights of an actual interview room.
It is the highest ROI activity you can possibly do for your career right now.
It truly is. It will change your professional life.
As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with one final lingering thought. This is drawn from a tease in our practitioner notes about counterintuitive truths, and it fundamentally challenges everything we have been traditionally taught about how to behave in an interview. We spend our entire careers and countless hours of interview prep trying to look absolutely flawless in front of hiring managers. We try to hide our gaps, polish our mistakes, and present a perfectly manicured version of ourselves. But if the generic, safe, perfectly polished answers are exactly what get you immediately rejected as a competent mediocrity, consider this reality. The perfect, flawless candidate never, ever gets the job. Ever. So what does that mean for how you choose to present your own imperfections, your own messy setbacks, and your own genuine, unpolished humanity in your very next interview?
Wow. Think about that.
Define leadership. Right now, we'll see you in the next one.